Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Both Sides of the Conversation. Welcome to our Sunday chat. We gather here every Sunday at 2 p.m. in this virtual space. I am your co-host, Danielle Tompkins, and the founder of Both Sides of the Conversation. And my co-host for today is...
John Henry, co-founder of Both Sides of the Conversation.
Wonderful. Well, Both Sides of the Conversation is providing a safe and honest space for open conversation. So please be respectful of that. Please be respectful of the panelists, hosts, and participants. Healthy debates and conversation are encouraged. Don't personalize anything with anyone. Name calling, bullying, shaming, or trolling will not be allowed here. Your perspective is yours. It's not a prescription. You don't have to agree, but please show respect. We are creating an open forum for dialogue and healing and education. Back to you.
All right. Thank you, Danielle. Just want to say thank you, everybody, for joining in. For you all that's on YouTube, please use the live chat function if you want to be a part of today's conversation. If you have any questions for our panelists, you can use the live chat function. So thank you guys for joining us. Just want to give a couple community announcements. Want to say thank you to everybody who showed up yesterday to the WAGA 16-year war against gun activity in San Francisco in D10. What a phenomenal event. I love to see the community and how the community came out in support of stopping this violence, marching together in solidarity. I just want to say thank you to our board president, Shaman Walton, coming out, representing his district, making sure that everything went smoothly and making sure that community needed it. And he heard from everybody what was needed to be done. So thank you. And thank you to all the young people showing up to the march, taking the lead, stepping in front, demanding change, want to have peace in the community, want to have love and unity, and want to feel safe when they're out in the community. So I want to thank all of the people that came out to make that event special, to all the mothers who lost their children of gun violence. Just happy to see all of them out there showing love, hugging and supporting, and trying to get this change in the community that we need. And I'm just blessed that I was able to be a part of that community event. It was just nice to see familiar faces and people in the community that are doing things to actually impact the community and change, and want to see this change in our community. And then lastly, I want to thank another organization, Uncle Damien from Us, put on a phenomenal event for our young people at the bowling alley yesterday, getting all the young people out of the community. I know this COVID has kept everybody in the house. Our mental health has been challenged, but to get our young people out of the community, out to go bowl and just enjoy and socialize and be around other people, laughing, good time, was a very, very phenomenal event. And I just wanted to thank everybody that came out, the fathers, the mothers. What a phenomenal event. So just want to thank the community to continue to push through in these challenging times, even past COVID, making sure that our young people are respected and loved and understand that we care about them, and these type of opportunities bring them together so that we can continue to teach them how to deal with each other, how to handle each other, how to socialize. And when we have differences, we can talk about it without having to use gun violence and other violence to handle our conversations. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to Danielle to introduce today's guest, and we're going to get this conversation about workplace discrimination started.
Cool. John, I just have a question for you. Did you beat them or did they beat you?
Oh, they beat me, but I had to show them some tricks. I still had it.
Oh, boy. Okay, a little dusty. You got to get your bowling skills up.
Right.
Well, everyone, we're going to have a wonderful show today. We're going to be talking about workplace discrimination. We have some wonderful guests lined up for the show. Our first guest is Miss Sharon Connors-Tipton. She is the Vice President of Diversity and Equality and Inclusion at Micron Technology. Welcome to the show, Miss Sharon. Sharon, are you there?
Hey, here I am. I was on mute. I was saying I'm so excited to be here and to have this conversation. I feel that it's really necessary. In addition to running diversity, equality, and inclusion at Micron, which is really about making sure we have representation from underrepresented groups and that they have the opportunity to grow and advance. I'm also responsible for employee relations, and we recently moved that function under diversity, equality, and inclusion. So employee relations really focuses on investigations and workplace discrimination. And we as a company moved it under DEI, diversity, equality, and inclusion, because we want to make sure that we have fairness in those processes, right? And as we hear claims of discrimination, that we are investigating them and ensuring that no one is receiving any unfavorable treatment based on their diversity dimensions. And when we talk about diversity dimensions, that could be your race, your age, your sexual orientation, and we'll talk more about that. But I'm just super excited to be here. I'm very passionate about diversity. I was born and raised in Oakland, California. I'm also also passionate about affordable care and healthcare in particular, and housing for underrepresented groups. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm excited to be here and just share all I know on this topic.
Thank you so much, Sharon. And we'll have some information, you guys, and feature it across, or how you can get in contact with our panelists today. So our next guest is Mr. Kevin Nichols. He is the co-founder and president and chief executive officer of the Social Engineering Project. Please welcome Mr. Kevin Nichols to the show.
Hello, everyone. How are you guys doing? Kevin Nichols, founder, president, and CEO of the Social Engineering Project, and recently joined Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory as its senior diversity integration partner. Primarily, my background comes from the legal industry, but I'm not a lawyer. However, I've worked on employment litigation cases in the past. Worked at big law firms for about 12 years, started my own consulting firm around 2012, and I've been running my nonprofit that does pipeline programs for young kids to get interested in traditional STEM since about 2016. So I'm happy to share my experiences and knowledge on this topic. Thank you.
All right, cool. Phenomenal guests, diverse backgrounds. I think this is definitely going to help the conversation. So we're going to just go ahead and jump into today's conversation. We're talking about this workplace discrimination. I know Sharon kind of touched on it a little bit. Can you all just kind of give everybody a little background? What does it actually mean, workplace discrimination? Where does it fall under? And then we can kind of kick the conversation off from there.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So, piggybacking on what I was saying earlier, workplace discrimination is, what is it? It's when you're being treated differently or unfairly based on a diversity dimension. And so there's some diversity dimensions that you can see. So for example, you look at me, you probably would guess I'm a woman, I'm a Black woman. You may guess I'm over 40, I am. So those are my diversity dimensions that you can see. Right. But there's also diversity dimensions that you can't see. So, for example, my sexual orientation or my religious beliefs, right? You don't necessarily know that off of the bat. If I'm a person with a disability, you may or may not be able to see that. But discrimination is when someone is treating you differently or unfairly based on that diversity dimension. Now, the good news is legally, we have some protected classes, meaning that some diversity dimensions are protected by law. And that means when you walk into a workplace, there should be no instance when you are treated differently based on those diversity dimensions, right? So that's the law. But then in addition to that, companies also have what we call code of conduct or policies as well that could very well protect you based on any diversity dimension that you have. But how I would explain it is if you are being treated different than your peers, other people that you work in, based on your particular diversity dimensions. Kevin, please add on.
I would only add, that was wonderful, by the way.
Yeah.
Gives very detailed perspective of what, in layman and laywoman's terms, of what employment discrimination is. I would refer people to the Employee Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC. I would Google that. That gives you a description of how the government looks at employment discrimination. And it talks about what the classes and things that are protected, but it also goes into a little bit more detail. It talks about unfair treatment, harassment, denial of reasonable workplace change. So if religious practices, et cetera, improper questions or disclosure. So things that you don't have to tell other people. And the last thing I think that's people forget about is retaliation. Sometimes you may report an incident that happens at work and they are not supposed to retaliate against you for doing so. So that's something that I would just recommend going Google search EEOC and finding out what things are there, how you can protect yourself, and how to spot when something like that's happening in your workplace.
Wow, phenomenal information. I hope the people out there get that information. But as we start jumping into this conversation, the Black and Brown community has been hit the hardest in this pandemic, and even before the pandemic, when it comes to these discrimination, these equity issues in the workplace. And it seems to be a trend of corporations being able to hide behind quote unquote we are a diverse organization, or we don't discriminate, because maybe they're a large organization that hire different backgrounds that fall under the classification of discrimination. But it still seems that the Black and brown community is hit the hardest when it comes to these conversations. And it seems that the corporations are able to kind of hide behind some of these issues. How do individuals out there that's working dealing with this actually navigate the system? Because there are larger companies who have these different diversity parts of the organization. A lot of it falls under HR, and we know over the years, it seems like they keep revamping and developing. I mean, over the last 15 years, I've seen kind of this diversity and inclusion conversation kind of change in many, many ways. And it's kind of been an unpopular thing in the past for people to talk about politics, talk about these issues in the workplace. But it seems here of late, since this racial justice movement has been moving, since George Floyd, there seems to be a change in corporate America in a sense where things that we didn't like to talk about in the workplace is starting to be out there a little bit more. You can see what's going on in Atlanta, how now large corporations, Coca-Cola, some of the larger people are starting to step up and say, hey, no, we can't have this, and we're going to walk in solidarity with the people. Is this the new change? Because it's always kind of been an unprofessional thing to talk about politics and religion and different things in the workplace, but it seems we're moving into this way of it's being acceptable. More corporations are getting behind it and trying to push the conversation. Are we there yet, or is this just something, again, that they're doing in the times that we're in right now?
Well, it's really hard to say whether or not something like this is going to be sustainable. I don't really think that that's even really the point. At this point, we need to take full advantage of what's happening right now. So whether you see Major League Baseball teams pulling out of cities because of unfair voting rights legislation, et cetera, it's those kinds of things. It's that kind of pressure that's occurring right now that we need to take full advantage of as Black people, particularly. And as long as the wave is going, that's what we should do. Now, we're looking back and we're seeing that the fights that we have now, we had back in the 60s. So people may get to a place where it's no longer feeling this way. And as time goes on, that may change. But I'm hopeful, and I'm looking forward to taking full advantage of the days and the times ahead.
Love that, Kevin. I totally agree with you. I think this is a pivotal moment in history. I can recall, and again, I'm dating myself, over 40, Rodney King incident. And I remember my father telling me, hey, that's not something you talk about at work, right? You can have your feelings, but you go to work, you keep your head down, you do a good job. You're there for a purpose. And that was great advice from him to me, because that's what he knew, right? And your parents want to give you the best. And so that made sense at the time, but times have changed. And that's what I'm like super jazzed about and excited about. There's a different level of accountability that is coming from our team members to our employers, right? So people are talking about this at work. Gone are the days where you show up at work and you leave who you are at home. You're now seeing people bring their whole selves to work. And that includes being impacted by what's going on externally in their environment. So I have team members coming to me saying, hey, Sharon, when are you guys going to speak out about anti-Asian hate? What are you guys going to do for Black Lives Matter, right? Looking at the crises in China and Hong Kong, what is our position on that, right? So it is a very different time where these discussions are taking place, not at home, but in the workplace, right? And what I love about what's going on is there's a war on talent, right now. It's hard to find good talent. So you all are in a position of power to go to your employer and say, hey, I'm not feeling that great today. I'm a Black man, and there's a lot going on with Black Lives Matter, and I don't feel supported, and I don't see us talking about this in the office. Or I'm a Hispanic person, and there's a crisis at the border. What is our company doing as far as social good? And so I think that's the change. And I know that businesses have a unique opportunity to be a real catalyst for change. And that's what we're starting to see, is more of this accountability. But it's really coming from the team members. leaders. So I would encourage you all, like Kevin said, not only to take advantage, right? So raise those issues. If you're in a role and you haven't been promoted in 5 years, why is that? If you're concerned about not being paid fairly, does your company have a pay equity analysis that they run every year? There's nothing wrong with asking those questions and raising those concerns, and also asking your company, where do they stand on these social issues, and what are they doing to advance good, not only in their company and as far as revenues, but around the world. And so to me, that's a big shift. Now, to Kevin's point, I don't know how long this focus will be on diversity, equality, and inclusion. So I can tell you right now, I've got companies calling me left and right. Everybody's looking for a chief diversity officer, right? How long is that going to last? Well, that's a great question for you to ask your company, right? Is this just in the moment? Or is this something that we're thinking about that's going to be long lasting? And how are we infusing diversity, equality, and inclusion into our talent lifecycle processes? Meaning how we promote people, how we hire people, how we pay people, right? Can you show me your processes and where this is going to be implemented to make a change? Or are you just doing what we call performative DEI? And that's the, town hall discussion or bringing in a speaker on Black Lives Matter. Like, that's great, but that's one piece of it, right? That is, starting the conversation. But where you're going to get lasting change is when you start holding leaders accountable and managers accountable, and it's part of the talent life cycle. So I agree with what Kevin said. Now is a great time to say, hey, something's not right here. I don't feel like I'm getting paid fairly. I don't feel like I'm being promoted. I don't feel like I have the same opportunities as my team members. If that's how you feel, there's nothing wrong with stating that, right? So Kevin is highlighting this is a great time. We are at a pivotal moment. People are tuned in. They're woke now. So it's a great time to have that conversation, but also take it a step further and hold your organization accountable.
I'm glad you said that, because that's where I was kind of wanting to go to, is the sustainability thing. And I see a lot of corporations across America talking about, we stand with Black Lives Matter, we support the Black community, and all of this. And again, it's kind of talk, because when you go to the boardrooms and you look at the organizational charts, the representation is not there. And I think this is what the Black and Brown community, you guys, they keep putting out, we're here, we support, we're trying to make this change in diversity. And I'm very glad you said that, because where does the sustainability look like? And I think it also has to be legislatively put in place as well.
The sustainability part looks like this. You've got to be able to, we've got to have organizations out there to hold companies accountable. And that's grassroots organizing. Back in the day, we had the NAACP and the Urban League and other, not saying that they don't exist now, but it's completely different the way that they function and how their impact is on big issues. We need organizations like that. So Black Lives Matter is like a movement, and there's chapters and that kind of stuff, but it's still different. However, what's different now versus other times, back in the apartheid era, I'm dating myself, Sharon, so don't feel bad, but back in the apartheid era, with a threatened to boycott and stuff really got people's attention, but you had to be super organized to do that. Can you imagine a young lady not wanting to move her seat and give up her seat, starting a boycott for a year in Montgomery, Alabama, without social media, without texting and calling people, and the kind of organization and diligence it took to be able to do something like that. Whereas we have all these tools now in our day-to-day, and we're not able to organize anything. But at the same time, here you are, if companies have been giving lip service since last year because of George Floyd, everybody put their Black Lives Matter statement out, and felt like, the job is done. A lot of these companies are getting met with people saying, look, if you're a part of this, if your money's going here, I think it was called the Occupy movement. People are like looking at where this money was, following this money and boycotting and getting people where it hurts. Now, these companies didn't come out and say, hey, we're Georgia based and we're just going to put this statement out there by nothing. There was pressure from that. And so as we continue to leverage our pressure, our ability to organize an ability to hurt companies in their pocketbooks to make them realize that we're the best consumer that they have, then we're able to make something like the sustainable.
Love that.
Phenomenal. But one of the things that I get here, we have this conversation here a lot. Organizations like the NAACP and some of these other organizations, community has failed. And it goes with the church and different things as well. They have failed the community. So the level of organization and coming together to advocate change, it's not really felt by community. And a lot of these people in these organizations, community fields have now become the new oppressors of the community. And we see it all the time with a lot of these organizations, especially in the human resource department. Things happen. And then all of a sudden we have a few people who look like us in there, but really the agenda is still the same. How do we unmask that? And how do we get the community to trust these organizations to help organize and get us to really move the change? Because the organizations are still doing the same tricks, just in different ways.
I got to push back on that real quick, and then Sharon, I'm gonna let you. Promise you, I'm gonna let you come in on this. I got to push back on that, John, because those organizations work. They didn't fail us. They did their job. They ran their race. They handed the baton, but there's nobody to catch it. Our generation right now is dropping the ball. We haven't come up with a solution. We don't have an organization, or either got involved in that organization to sustain it, or created our own, et cetera, where we're able to do what they did. But they did it, and those people are tired. They're retired. They want to just, if you've seen Jesse Jackson lately, he's got a lot of ailments right now. He's older in age. But he ran his race, and it's up to us to run ours. And so that's what I would push back on. Sharon, if you have anything else to say.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to push back a little bit too, because I'm in HR, right? So I'm like, don't say nothing about HR. No, I'm teasing. So there's, just like any other business function, there's good HR and there's bad HR at every company, right? But again, I'll go back to accountability, right? And making sure that you're part of the solution, right? So when I think about the need for representation of underrepresented groups at companies, right? What are you doing out in your community to support that? If you're in corporate America right now, are you mentoring someone? Are you showing them, exposing them to all of the possibilities that are available to them in corporate America? Like, I think we all have a responsibility to not say, oh, HR needs to do this. HR is 200 people, right? Out of a company, out of, let's say, 5,000, I don't know. But whatever the ratio is, they can't fix it all, right? So it's up to every team member to step in and do their part, right? So if you're working with someone and they just don't get it, are you explaining to them why this matters, why it's important, why they need to be an ally? I think we can't pass the buck to everybody else. To Kevin's point, we have to step up and do something different if we want different results. And so that's my call to action to everybody that's listening is, how are you going to be a part of the solution? How do we get more Blacks and Latinx folks in STEM? Right? How do we create that exposure and those opportunities, right? And if we're in these corporations, we know that diverse leaders hire diverse talent, right? That's a proven fact. So are you doing that? Are you mentoring these folks? Are you giving them opportunity? Are you sharing with them your lessons learned? I think that certainly corporations have their parts to do, but then we as a people have our part to do as well. And when we do our part and the corporations do their part, that's where the magic happens.
I love the pushback. This is both sides of the conversation. Now we can get going, because I'm going to respectfully disagree on a couple of things. I believe HR is a key component into making that change. Everything starts and happens at HR. And I think a lot of times when people are calling out HR and trying to hold HR accountable, again, and I've talked to people, I've seen it, I've been around. They hide behind that mask, and I think there's some specific changes that can happen to definitely make that change. But I think HR is a pivotal part of what that change look like and how it happened, because they're the ones that's doing the hiring most of the time. They're doing the firing, they're doing the onboarding. And I go to a lot of these corporations and I have these conversations about organizational charts, the structures and how it's set up. And again, I think, the common thing is when you start challenging these corporations, you ask them, because as soon as you start talking about race and the disproportionate of Black and brown people, it's always, I'll get to you with a report, and it's always hidden, right? And I think they have to do a better job of, like, for most people, it's see it, right? So if you put an organizational chart up, and I think a lot of companies are starting to go to it, a lot of the city and county, a lot of the state organizations are doing it, attaching pictures to the profiles of the organizational charts. So now it's kind of playing today, and I think the more companies do it, it makes it better, because then you can actually see. You look at an organizational chart, and there's 2,000 employees, and there's 5 Blacks. It's not so much of a
Well,
I have a couple points on that, but I'm gonna let Kevin jump in.
Okay,
I gotta push back. Let's understand the role of HR, because I think there's where the disconnect is. HR's function really is to provide benefits, to provide human resources for the people that work there. However, when there's a complaint or when there's an issue, whether we're talking about workplace discrimination. So if discrimination occurs, well, there draws a line between HR. Who's HR going to protect? The employee or the company? And so at the end of the day, they have a duty to protect the company in order to be able to have a place for the employee to work. So if it ever comes down to you versus the company is going to win. So that's the purpose of the EEOC, because the EEOC is meant to equalize that. They're your advocate. You use what they call an OSBID, or a neutral person that you call and do a tip or let people know that an issue has occurred. Then there's an investigation. Now, a lot of people don't like the fact that the results of investigations don't usually become public. And that's frustrating. But at the same time, a lot of people can make allegations or say things that are false. And if it's proven or the investigation shows that there was no wrongdoing, well, then that person's going to be, was going to be exposed, and or that information could make them look bad unnecessarily. And that kind of damage is irreparable. So all that I'm saying is understanding that it gets complicated in the weeds. And I saw there was a question about, there are questions coming up. So I want to make sure we have time for that. And Sharon.
Yeah, we'll start going through the questions. I definitely had to get that out there, but go ahead, Sharon, and then I'll jump in there, and then we'll start getting the questions.
So what I would add to this conversation is that I've worked in a few organizations, right? And ultimately, my mandate as an HR professional is going to come from my leadership team. So I've worked for leadership teams that are very passionate about diversity, equality, and inclusion. And I work for leaders and CEOs that don't have that same passion. And I will tell you the end results are very different. So sometimes, people look to HR, but HR is carrying out the objectives of the company, right? So I'm blessed in that I work for a company where our CEO fundamentally feels like diversity, equality, and inclusion is the right thing to do. And what that does is it allows me to do a lot more. It gives me resources. It gives me authority, right? It allows me to advocate for my team members in a very different way than I've been able to in the past. So I want to call out, a lot of times people look to HR, but really you should be looking to the leadership, the C-suite of that company, and the shareholders, right? So the shareholders have a lot of power in companies. So if you own stock in Nike, you can send Nike a letter and say, hey, why don't you have more diversity on your board? And I'm just picking a brand. I don't know if they do or don't. But my point is, the shareholders also drive a lot of what you see happening in the company. And to your point around transparency, shareholders are actually asking for more transparency. So they are saying, I want to see what the diversity on your board is. What is the diversity of your leadership team? How are you paying people, right? Do you have pay equity equity? Are you ensuring there's equal pay for equal work? So as more people start to stand up and again demand that accountability, you're going to see that, right? You're going to see that happen at the company. But again, HR is working for the company. Now, we do have an obligation to also make sure our employees are protected and treated fairly, but our initiatives, our goals, all of that comes from the top down. So I just want to highlight that.
Yeah, I want to say this too. I agree with you, Sharon. When I saw you sitting back, I do believe that it comes down to leadership and management teams, because those teams are not often diverse, especially in management. So when I see African Americans going through workplace discrimination, it's often have to do with promotions, right? And so who's in charge of promoting those people, right? And so when I see a team of predominantly Asians hiring Asians, I see Latino people hiring Latinos, I see white people hiring white people, but when it comes to Black people, it seems like in management, they get a little scared there. You know what I'm saying? Because, oh, if I hire too many people, they'll look at me funny. But we're oftentimes not even enough in those positions to do that. But yes, I definitely agree with you. The team is definitely an issue. But let's go ahead and cover this question at the bottom. How can you tell if you're denied a job based off physical disability?
Ooh, fantastic question. Go ahead.
That's a tough one, because number one, you'd have to be able to figure out how they would know that you have a physical disability. I mean, if you're sending a resume and you don't get a job interview or whatever, unless you state on your resume that you have one, they won't know. And unless they see you on camera, like virtually now, we have these interviewing process, and they're able to see you and you have a deformity or something like that. I guess that's a way that they would see something. But otherwise, I think it's very hard for them to be able to know that you have a physical disability. But at the same time, like I said, it's unless you're like final round and you get beat out or something, or if that's something that occurs on a consistent basis, then you might think that companies are discriminated against you. But that's a very hard thing to prove. And you might have to hire an attorney to really get to the bottom of that, if that's something that you feel really did occur. And that could be pretty expensive, but I'd leave that up to you. But I think that would be kind of hard. What do you think?
I think you're dead on there, Kevin, but I would say you also can ask for feedback. So if you are denied a job, it would be helpful to understand why, right? Or what did the candidate that was ultimately selected, what did they bring that maybe you have an opportunity to work on? So I would ask for some feedback, right? Because that's going to tell you a lot about the company. The other thing I would say is when you're interviewing with companies, they're not just interviewing you, you're interviewing them too. So I would ask about their inclusive hiring practices, because if anyone comes to Micron and they have a disability, we would welcome them with open arms. We want that representation at our company. We are seeking out that talent. So what kind of company is this are you going to? Do they have inclusive hiring practices? Do they value different diversity dimensions? When you're interviewing, who are you interviewing with? Do you see people that look like you or that are representative of the communities in which the company is operating? And that's going to be a red flag for you to say, yeah, this is someplace I want to work, or no, this may not be the place for me. So don't shy away, ask those questions. If you're a person with a disability, you may want to know, what type of accessibility support do you offer in your company for people with disabilities? And if they don't have a great answer, that may not be the place for you.
Right. And our company, the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory, we have ERGs that are, for people with deformities or disabilities, et cetera. So, and I know a lot of other companies do. So that shouldn't be a criteria to not hire you, but also it would, if they knew about it, they would actually want to do the opposite, because it definitely shows that it keeps them true to their effort of wanting to have a diverse workplace. So I see there's another question.
Yeah, we're going to jump into the second question here.
So Rick's asking, how is the EEOC information on a job application used? Does the employer see it? And is it possible it could be used against candidates of color? So Rick, I know you. Thanks for writing that question. And I mentioned the EEOC, so you calling me out. It's all good though. Okay, so what I will say to you is, number one, in general, it depends on the type of company, because public institutions are utilizing, they have EEOC information because it's still a federal requirement for affirmative action. Although California got rid of affirmative action, it still exists federally. And so they have to report on whether or not they're meeting goals and objectives of hiring diverse supplier diversity folks. They have to look at their numbers and see how many people exist at the company, and knowing how many females they have, how many people refer to themselves as LGBTQ, have disabilities, veterans, et cetera. All this information they have to capture and report. And so by doing so, I guess the second part of your question was, they use this information against you, et cetera. And I would say that not necessarily. Because you're already at the company. And so chances are if you're Black, they already know it. So there are other things that you've already disclosed, whether you're involved in an ERG or other things like that. That's just from reporting aspects of things, but they don't need that information necessarily to single you out. So I would just say that, you should identify that stuff, because it does hold the company more accountable. If they are failing in areas, they need to be able to demonstrate that and have a benchmark or a point of reference where they're starting from, in order to know that they're making progress in the right direction. So if you don't identify, they don't know how many people they have. They don't know how to drive improvement in that area.
Yeah, Kevin, I think you covered that beautifully. Definitely, we use it for reporting purposes. I would add on to that it's very helpful for me to have that information. So any decent company is going to protect your data. They're going to de-identify it, meaning when we run reports, your name comes off, right? So no one could look at a line item and say, oh, Rick is Black and he is over 40, right? You're going to be a number on a spreadsheet. But what it allows me to do as the VP of Diversity, Equality, and Inclusion is when I'm running my pay equity analysis, if you've identified as a member of an underrepresented group, I can ensure that you are getting paid fairly. It means when we're auditing promotions, I can pull certain populations and make sure that our people with disabilities or, our Blacks in the organizations are being promoted at the same rate as their peers. I can look at how long you've been in a job. Are you sitting in a job, 2 years longer than your peers who aren't part of that group, right? I can look at performance reviews, right? And make sure that you're being rated on your performance fairly. So all of that data is extremely helpful to me. And that's why we do protect it. And John, I know you mentioned put everybody on an org chart and show that transparency. One of the reasons we don't do that is because we want to protect your data, right? So we're not always super transparent about what we have, but behind the scenes, I'm making sure that when you come to work at Micron, you have every opportunity to advance and you're being paid the same as everybody else. So please share that information.
Yeah, definitely. And I understand the privacies. And I know a lot of the public sector jobs, the city and counties and states, it's a little different because it is public record. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. But I think we need to move more towards that as we talk about the transparency, or at least have it in a sense that when it is requested and companies or different people are asking for that information, they have access to it. Because I think that shows the clear picture. Just giving numbers and names doesn't always work. And I think that's how a lot of times people are affected. So I'm glad you touched on that. And then just want to jump back and thank Kevin for, starting that conversation about when it comes to HR and who they represent. And I think a lot of time in our community, they don't understand that. And I think that's where the equity or the inequities happen, because when you are dealing with these situations, and I think this is honing into this conversation that I've been talking about, this cancel culture, right? And as these discriminatory practices happen and people are being affected, because we have this cancel culture, it seems to start to affect the Black and brown community more because now people don't want to speak up. So these things happen, you report it to HR, you report it to your manager, then you become a target. And then the retaliation starts, and then the harassment, then the bullying in the workplace. And I hear this over and over from a lot of people. And again, it goes back to this cancel culture. When people try to speak up and they shunned upon and they turned off, it tends to move everybody else from stepping forward. And I just think that's going to help hurt our movement moving forward. And I just want to get you guys thoughts around it. How do we fix it? Because as soon as you say, I get it, HR is for management or for the corporation. Do we have true equity in these processes, right? Because at the end of the day, if your job is to protect the company, no matter if it's what they say, lying, crying, cheating, and stealing, we got to do what we got to do to protect the company. And that's not always in the best interest of the people who are being affected or to the true process of true equity.
That's a good point. What I would say is, as an employee, just as things evolve, times change. 20 years ago, I had a different perspective of HR. Working in law firms, working closely with HR, I developed a level of trust and would disclose things and that kind of stuff. But I've also seen, from my experience and background and working on cases in employment litigation where things have gone awry and information that was shared or gathered had been turned and used against the plaintiffs in certain cases. And so there's this balance at the end of the day. And I cannot stress to you enough. I am, like I said, my first disclosure, I'm not an attorney, but I've worked in the legal field for 20 years of my career. And I am a big proponent of seeking legal counsel. It's as if you have an ailment, something feels wrong inside your body, you're going to go see a medical doctor and get it looked at and fixed. That's the same thing as finding an attorney. There are a number of local bar associations, no matter where you live, that have free legal clinics, or they have a free legal referral line that you can get advice about a situation independent from your company so that you have an advocate to help you navigate this process. It's sad that you need to do that, but that's a great way to protect your interests and your rights. Oftentimes with companies, they have arbitration agreements or mediation. So that kind of keeps a lot of the stuff that happens internally and it doesn't get out and leak to the public because there's non-disclosures and everything is kept confidential and private. Nonetheless, I believe that you have to be smart about things. And sometimes as people of color, et cetera, as you mentioned, John, we're not afforded the same types of things that other people may have coming in. And so that's why I said that you should always have an advocate and have someone that you can trust and turn to that doesn't have anything to gain from you sharing information. And talking to an attorney makes that confidential, and that's between you and that person.
Yeah, I'll just chime in, John, because you bring up a good point, and Kevin, you touched on this. HR is there to protect the company. Part of protecting the company is ensuring that your company has a solid brand, right? And that when people who have worked for your company or currently in your company, when they go out and they talk about your company, they're talking about it in a positive light, and they've had an experience that is equal to their team members, right? So part of protecting the company is making sure that you don't have discrimination, that people aren't experiencing microaggressions, that you aren't retaliating against team members who are speaking up because something just isn't right. And so I just want to highlight that, it's not just about making sure the company's in a good light. It's making sure we get to the root of the issue. And if we have bad managers that are discriminating against people based on their race or their age or their disability status, that we get those managers out of the company, because that's not good business, right? And we want to attract the very best and brightest talent. And newsflash, talent isn't one particular diversity dimension. It looks very different, right? And it comes in every flavor you could imagine. So we want to bring those folks into our organization. But if we have a brand that when you get here, you're not treated with respect, you're not seen, you're not heard, you're not valued, we can't attract that talent. And so when you talk about HR protecting, one of my primary roles is protecting the experience of our underrepresented groups and really everyone at Micron, making sure that everyone is treated in a way that we can be proud of. And to me, that is the true role of a good HR function. So I just want to highlight that. The last thing I would want is a newspaper article saying someone at my company was discriminated against, right? That's not protecting the company.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I'm very glad you brought that up. It sounds like you have a great corporation that's doing it. And I hope other corporations take the lead of Micron and having that experience for people. Because again, in our community, a lot of times, not all, but a lot of times, our experience in the workplace is not satisfied and it's not sustainable for the community. And we know that 8 hours a day, sometimes 10 or 12 hours a day, that's a primary function of our life at work, and trying to make that experience better is definitely something that's needed, and I think it'll be valued. But thanks for sharing that. So I guess let me check here to see if there's any other conversation. Let's see. Let's see. So I know those two questions that came in were for people that have disabilities, and we having a conversation coming up here about the ADA. My brother here, I know who this is.
I
is
do
talking
too.
about, yeah,
My boy.
yeah. So I have a couple. So I think Tanae, the lady who sent in the comment earlier, they both wheelchair bound, and I've heard unfortunate stories from them and several others about how our ADA community is being affected by some of the employment opportunities and not being able to have the proper accesses and ramps and accommodations that's needed. And I think that's a lot of what they're speaking to. So I wanted to see if I can have you all kind of touch on some of the things and how to help some of these people that have these issues with ADA issues with getting access or speaking up and advocating for themselves to get the HR and get the employer to kind of move towards the change that also helps affect them.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So Jamel, thank you first of all for raising that question. And I don't know your particular story, but if your experience hasn't been positive, I recognize that, and I just want to say I'm sorry because that's not acceptable. So what I would say is, number one, if you are a person with a disability, the good news is this is a great time for you, because what we have found is that COVID and remote work has been really democratizing, and that it levels the playing field, right? Everybody's at home, everybody's on the screen, everybody has the accommodations that they need on screen. So I would start there if I was looking for a role, right? Do you all offer remote work? What are the accommodations for people with disabilities? Are there special programs, right? What type of third parties are you partnering with to ensure your people with disabilities are able to do their very best work? And so there are many employers that again are looking for people with disabilities. In certain countries, we have mandates, we have EEO requirements as well. So you are highly sought after. It's just finding the organization that's going to value that and make sure that you have the tools that you need. So I would lead with that and ask those questions. And again, I go back to, it's not just you, the company interviewing you, you're interviewing the company, and you want to make sure you get into an environment where you are going to feel like you're included and you belong, and that people understand your diversity dimensions and what you need to be successful. So I would actually lead with that when I'm talking to organizations, and do your homework. You can go on Glassdoor, you can go on Blind to get a sense of what are experiences of other people with disabilities as they walk into these organizations.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think that I was going to say something similar regarding at least the ability to work remotely and taking advantage of COVID. COVID has been an equalizer for a lot of people, and a lot of the barriers. I remember, people a year and a half ago were begging and pleading to get every other Friday off, to spend more time with family and that kind of stuff. Now every day is every Friday off. And now you really want to go back into the office. So the bottom line is, the argument should be made. You should definitely check that box that you have a disability. However, the argument can be made that you can do the job anywhere. And we've proven that we're able to do that now. So I think that would be encouraging to apply, but also keep in mind that there is the EEOC, and that if you feel as though you're being discriminated against, you have a right to look into that.
And I just want to add one more thing, because you mentioned, holding HR accountable and going to HR, but it doesn't stop there. Like, I have team members that will email my CEO like, hey, this is what's happening, or this is my experience or my perception. I want to make you aware. And I think that's important, right? We should know at the top of the organization what's going on. So not only reach out to HR, but if you have the opportunity to talk to your leaders, or if you're leaving a company, share your experience. Hey, I was a person with a disability here, and I didn't feel supported. I didn't feel like I could do my best work. And let me give you some feedback, right? A lot of companies have exit interviews where you can share that. You can even, some people are depending on what they want to share, they'll send a letter to the board of directors. So there are people out there that will listen. It doesn't start and stop with HR. And I'm not saying everybody go send a letter to the CEO, but I'm just saying you can have those conversations. Hopefully you have an open door organization where you can go to any leader and say, hey, here's what's going on. Because again, it can't just be HR, right? It starts at the top.
Sharon, I'm glad you cleared that up. You'd have told the community to send letters to their CEO. They about to start emailing today.
No, I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying that is an avenue. Like, my CEO, he meets with our employee resource groups and he wants that feedback, right? And that's good, because that holds me accountable. It holds HR accountable. It holds our mid-level managers accountable, right? He needs to hear what's happening in the organization. So if your CEO isn't having those conversations, a question might be, why? Does he or she want the feedback, or maybe you just proactively give it?
Yeah, and I want to get farther than that. And I know Kevin got to step out shortly, but I wanted to say, Rick's having some good questions, and I kind of echo what he put up here, because I was asking these undisclosures is a big problem, because once the community, once the organization is able to hide behind those disclosures, most times, not all time, but most times, change doesn't happen. And sometimes it does with, removing the manager or removing the people. But these disclosures is also some of the problems that affect the community, because I think corporations, as the public becomes aware of some of the things, they tend to take a little bit more of a stance to make change. But I think sometimes they hide behind that mask with these disclosures. And that's what kind of keeps these issues going on in a lot of organizations. But how do we fix that? I mean, is it a fixable thing, or is that just, it is what it is?
You fix that on a local level. You are, every time you vote for someone who's going to either represent you in the state or representing you on a federal level, your vote counts. You need to make sure that people understand that they need to change the laws. They're lobbying now to get these gun manufacturers to release themselves from, qualified immunity, so that, now that they can be liable for these mass shootings, because they're creating the guns. And so once you start changing the laws, you'll see that things start changing. So if they get rid of, I know in California, I think they even have like non-compete clauses are kind of useless here in California.
Correct.
Really about changing laws that are holding back individuals. And so that's what we really need to do. Vote the right people in, make sure that they understand and know what our issues are, getting these signatures on the ballot. Even though Gavin Newsom's going to probably keep his job, the fact that these people were able to organize and annoy him by creating the signatures, a million signatures, whatever, to try to do a recall, that's how you get people's attention. And so until you raise issues like that, nothing's going to change pretty much.
And also another thing, and I'm glad you spoke to that, Kevin, is these legislative bills. We have to do a better job, community, our leaders holding them accountable to watch how these laws are written, because a lot of the darkness is in the policy, the way they're being written, a lot of these Senate bills. And since Sharon is here, I want to ask her from an HR perspective, because I've been a shop steward, I've advocated for employees, I understand some of the HR issues. But since you're talking about these laws and people getting involved, Kevin, time off of voting has been a big issue, especially here in California, the way it's written. And a lot of companies, they use it and leverage it in ways. And sometimes here in the Bay Area, the distance to work is pretty far. And I think that's a law that needs to be changed a little bit and written. And I also think we need to just have a day for voting off so that everybody has. I'd rather remove one of these other holidays that we really don't need to be representing to have a day just for voting, to make sure that it's important, because people get discouraged. And I mean, we have people in the Bay Area commuting sometimes 2 hours. And I think the voting process is not enough. It's not enough time allowed, given the single parents and just the stuff that we deal day to day, to actually go through these bills and these, to go through the process properly. And that time is needed. And it's always been an issue. I'm always, when it comes to voting time, getting this 2 hour thing off is always, or the time needed. It's been a challenge. How do we navigate and fix that? Because it's a challenge. And I'm sure Sharon sees a lot of that on HR, getting the time off and things of that nature. How do we fix that to make that better so that people do have the adequate time to actually go through these bills that they're voting on, and bonds and different things like that, these measures? How do we fix that so that we do get the people involved? And I think sometimes these little branches put in there helps divide and getting people involved.
Yeah, so I will say not all companies are the same, right? And I think, John, what you're highlighting is there are some companies that aren't providing adequate time, or they're defaulting to the legal requirement. But then there's also, I want to point out, some amazing companies that are going above and beyond the legal requirement to encourage or incent their team members to vote. And so, again, I'm going to go back to us and say, where do you want to work, right? And let's start to be a little bit more selective and start asking those questions, right? And I would hope that even if the law is 2 hours, if you have a special circumstance, that you could have that conversation with your manager to say, hey, I live in Oakland, I work in the Silicon Valley, it's going to take me 4 hours just to get to and from the voting polls. Can I have some flexibility here? So I think communication is always good, and typically people respect that. But two, I want you to think about what are the values of your company. And if you're working for a company that doesn't want to give people time off to vote, regardless of what the law says, maybe it's time that we start thinking a little bit differently and exploring some other options. I also want to jump on the question in the chat from Tishelle. I thought it was a fabulous question about AI and how we sometimes see bias. I want to highlight that there's also AI for good. So my company actually uses AI in the opposite way. So we use AI to actually strip off of your resume your name, your diversity dimension, right? So when the hiring manager gets your resume, all they're seeing is your experience. They don't know if you're male or female. They don't know if you're black or white. They don't know any of that. They're just looking at the qualifications of the job versus your experience. So I think AI, it can be tricky, but it's up to the company on how are they going to use that information. Another way that companies use AI, so we use technology called Eightfold. And what Eightfold does is it goes out and it looks at all the resumes in your database, and it says, okay, based on your criteria, these are the folks that match the job description the best. And these are the diverse candidates that you should look at. So it's actually doing you a favor. So to look at my resume and say, oh, I see Sharon's part of the Black Ski Club. She's probably Black and she matches all the requirements. You should take a look at this resume. So, there's many ways that AI can be used, and absolutely there is some bias in it, but it also can be used to really do some wonderful things in support of increasing representation of underrepresented groups and companies. So I just want to highlight that.
Yes, AI is going to be around regardless, and we definitely need to make sure that we use it responsibly. I just did in December, completed a data science for inclusive artificial intelligence at Haas School of Business, and phenomenal executive program to kind of help, figure out who's writing the algorithms, and if they have diverse people that are creating input and training the algorithms to look for the right conclusions. Technology is going to always, still kind of get it wrong because there are still nuances from human beings that, regardless, they won't be able to pick up. But nevertheless, it is a start to try to be able to level the playing field. And then also doing things like staying away from, facial recognition software and other things that are inherently disproportionately affecting Black and brown people on a large scale. So.
Thanks, guys. I had a question, though. I wanted to go back to a little bit about voting in politics. Not that you're the experts, but why did affirmative action fail in California, as diverse as we are? Any thoughts on that?
Well, we're not as diverse as you think, first and foremost. For me, I'll be honest with you. I was in school at Berkeley during Prop 209. So I was on the front lines of protesting and arguing that this thing would pass in the first place. But fast forwarding, and I'm not going to say when that was, because that's definitely telling you how old I was. But at the same time, you're looking now where you think you're in California, it's a blue state, et cetera, et cetera. I live, in the East Bay, driving on 680. I see over the freeway overpasses Trump flags. I see, the Confederate flag, things of that nature, here in the Bay Area. So sometimes people think that this is like rural and that this is so separate and there's only a handful of people that believe this way. Your coworker, your next door neighbor, there are people, you might have cousins. You have people in your family that are not as you think that they are. And in that voting booth, it's just between you and that booth of what you're filling out and signing. So what I'm saying is that we're not as progressive as we think we are. I think that Biden won by 7 million votes. So 84 million people in this country, regardless of everything that they've seen, still voted for President Trump. So former President Trump. So that's an indication that the divide that we think exists is a lot greater than we can imagine. And not everybody sees diversity, equity, inclusion, as well as seeing Black people on an equal playing field, really want to see that.
I think that's it, Kevin. So I think that a lot of people see it as a zero-sum game, right? So to open the door for you, I have to give up my seat. And it's not that we're asking anyone to give up their seat. We're just asking you to make room for somebody else, right? So scoot over a little bit so that we can have other folks pull up a chair at the table and have a voice at the table. And I think when people think about affirmative action, they think about, wow, somebody super qualified isn't going to get this job, so we can give this job to someone who isn't as qualified but is diverse. And that is not what it is and what it's about. But I think we have to change that mindset and get people to understand it's about making sure everyone has an opportunity, right? And not that we're taking something from you, but we're leveling the playing field, as Kevin said, and we are looking for the best candidate, and we're broadening our net for that search, right? So we're not looking just at our neighbors or our friends or our families to fill these positions, but we're really going out in the market and saying, let's look at all the talent and then let's pick the best candidate for the job. And I think that still doesn't click with people. I still get the question all the time, well, am I not going to get the job so that somebody else who is diverse can get the job? And it's like, no, that's not what this is. So I think that we all need to call out that false narrative And people also need to understand that when you look at diverse talent, when you look at the Black population, the Latinx population, they have the same qualifications, right? So it's not that we're lowering the standards to bring in diverse talent. We're just simply giving the opportunity.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask this question because, and I'm a little radical at times, and they think I'm a little radical out there. But I want to ask: is the real fight for the Black and Brown community to be fighting for diversity and equality, or do we just focus on the equity and inclusion part? I just want to hear what you guys think about that, because I think we should just focus on the equity and inclusion, because the diversity seems to dilute what our struggles are, and that's just my belief. But I want to hear from your perspectives what you think about that.
I'll
Well,
jump in. Oh, go
yeah,
ahead.
well, no, go ahead. 'Cause I'm trying to figure out, I'm trying to understand the difference when you say diversity, but then you're chopping that off into equity and inclusion. So, Sharon, go ahead.
I was going to say, so when I think about diversity, that's easy. That's counting, right? How much do we have of this or that, right? The people in the company that are diverse. Inclusion that's tricky. That's how do they feel when they get there? Do they have a voice at the table? Do they have equal opportunity to advance, or are they just there in the lower level positions, right? But I think you need both. Like I hear people say, we shouldn't focus on diversity. We should focus on inclusion. But if you don't have diversity, who are you including? So I think you have to have both pieces. We clearly have underrepresentation. If you look at tech companies in Silicon Valley, Blacks are usually at between 2 and 5%, right? And we know that there's more than that in our population. So we gotta focus on diversity, getting people in the door. But then the inclusion piece is, do we respect them when they get there? Do they feel like they want to come here on Monday morning? Is this a safe? Do they have psychological safety? Do they feel like they have friends at work? All of that matters, right? People think it don't matter. It matters a lot, right? And then the equity piece is, do they have the ability to advance in the company? You brought them in as a technician. Can they grow to be an engineer? Can they grow to be a manager, right? Are they being considered for rotational assignments? If we've got an assignment in Singapore, are we considering them as well, right? Do they have the same opportunity?
The job position.
Yes, the all of the opportunities, right? There's a development program at Stanford. Who are we sending, right? All of that matters.
Not just the secretary and janitor, like,
yeah, exactly. And are you being paid fairly, right? Who's getting these spot bonuses, right? You're doing great work. Tim is doing great work. Who gets the bonus? Is it decided fairly? So to me, I feel like every piece should be equally weighted, and it's just as important, because without that, something's off, right? It's not working together, and we're not going to make real progress. So I would say, John, you need every piece of that for us to truly make an impact and get to where we want to go, and for diversity, equality, and inclusion to be more than just, as someone said, lip service, right? I like to say, you can't hire your way out of bad retention, meaning I can hire Blacks all day long to come into Micron, but if they don't like it when they get there, if they're not respected when they get there, they're going to leave. So if I keep hiring, but they're leaving because they're not getting promoted and they're not being respected, what's the point?
Right. And the last point that I want to make about this too, like we do need another acronym, but I work for the Department of Energy and then also Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory, and they have an acronym that we use called IDEA, and that stands for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accountability. So the A piece is the part that I like to focus on, because all of this stuff is great, checking boxes, hoping to recruit and retain people, making the work-life balance important component, making sure everybody feels safe and comfortable working there, et cetera. But at the end of the day, if you don't hold everyone accountable for what you're doing, it's almost a waste of time. Because at the end of the day, you're going to get a lot of pushback. A lot of people will say they're going to do things, but if they're not held accountable, and that's tied to their compensation, their bonuses, those kinds of things that matter to them, it
right.
will just continue to be lip service. And so with
That's
that,
it, Kevin. That's the key.
Kevin, don't promote no more acronyms. I'm so tired of acronyms. I don't want to hear another thing about acronyms because, like you said, we don't. A lot of times they're not even followed. But
Black indigenous people of color, baby, I'm buy out, buy whatever, buy POC.
All right, thank you. I know you got to cut out of here, man. I appreciate you coming on, good brother, and giving us that feedback. And hopefully in the future we could definitely connect and do something because educating our community is what we're trying to do. And having Sharon and you here as we move forward and we move out of this pandemic, our community needs it. We need some HR people to come on and help these people who are going to be looking for work. As you know, we've been hit the hardest when it came to this this layoff and unemployment through this pandemic. And as people start getting back into this work mode, definitely need people like you, Kev, to come on and just kind of give people some of those tips and gems to get back in there and keep moving. So I appreciate you for stepping on. Sharon, if you still have a few minutes, we could keep going if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks, Kev. So yeah, I think that was just phenomenal. And like I said, what is that? And it sounds like your company's doing a phenomenal job at making those changes. But yeah, we're coming out of this pandemic. From your perspective or from your lens, what do you see some of the changes? Because we have been doing a lot of work on Zoom, and I know some of the issues that people have talked about is I've had people kind of have conversations about, they don't want their face on while they having Zoom meetings at work.
Yeah.
What can you kind of talk about some of the changes and how that's affecting people? And as we come out of this pandemic, some corporations are letting people come back. Some people are going to still be working remotely. What does that look like from an HR lens to kind of give people some of that knowledge and information, what they need as we come out of this pandemic?
Yeah, I saw Jamel had another comment and it said something like inviting me to work and not having a ramp for me is not inclusive. And I agree with that. And that's what we've seen through COVID, right? Everyone's on Zoom. So now the playing field is equal, right? If we have happy hour, we all have to meet up on Zoom and do it. It doesn't exclude certain people. And I think what we've proven over COVID is that we are able to successfully continue on with our work at home. And that's a game changer, right? So what that means is a lot of team members are demanding more flexibility, right? So some people certainly want to get back into the office, but what we're hearing particularly from women, from Black women, and if you haven't read the Women in the Workplace study by McKinsey, the McKinsey study, you should read it because they specifically call out women and Black women and executive women. What we're hearing from them is they need this flexibility. They want to be able to have some time in the office, but they also want to be able to manage their schedules and work from home as well. And again, there's a war on talent. So what employers are trying to figure out is how do we balance the needs of our business with the needs of our team members? And so that looks different, right? You see Google just recently set a return to work date, and they talk about their program and how they're going to give some flexibility. And then you have Twitter, who's on the other end of the spectrum, and they're saying everyone can work from anywhere. I think Salesforce has done the same thing. And then you have other companies that say, hey, we're a work from work culture. To be successful, we need to be in the office. So you're going to see a lot of different variety in what life after COVID looks like. I think what's important to call out is now is a great time to share with your manager, your company, what your particular needs are. So if you have a child that's still going to be out of school after your return to work date, you should be sharing that with them and talking about, hey, what does this look like for me? What type of flexibility can you offer me? If you are a person with a disability and you have everything set up at home and you were able to demonstrate that you were able to do your job effectively, maybe that's a conversation you need to have about what does a long-term accommodation look like. So it's going to be different at every single company, but I can tell you every company is thinking about this and they're having the discussion. And so now is a great time to raise it as an issue, if it is an issue for you.
Wow, definitely. That's great information to give. And I know a lot of companies are starting to make this shift and change. I get a lot of people talking about, they go into some of these organizations. It's like, they go through their, orientation, and then they just kind of thrown to the wolves. They don't really know how to navigate all of the systems. And I'm asking for all of our HR personnel people that's out watching is how do we come up with processes to have in place to really help employees navigate the system, to really know how to use those pipelines to get the resources and information that they need. And I think that's really a commitment that needs to happen, because I think a lot of discrimination issues, a lot of the issues that take place in the workplace environment, when people properly know the chain of command and how to navigate systems, I think a lot of it gets eliminated. And I think sometimes in the larger community, larger organizations, you can get lost. And I think that's where a lot of these issues come in, and just learning how to navigate. And I wish a lot of companies would do a better job of just making that investment, so that when employees come in there and really navigate and understand who their point of contact is, how to navigate these different needs, and setting those, organization communication charts for issues and different things. Because you never have a chart when you have an issue who to go to, right? It's like, talk to your manager. Well, if I don't like my manager, who do I talk to? You talk to this person. I don't like this person, right? So setting up those channels of communication is very effective for employees, especially in larger organizations, just to kind of, remove some of those barriers. And I think more stuff will be resolved, and some of the issues can be handled without having to go up top. I hear a lot of times I have other people that I know in HR, and it's like, this person, you got to go to the top. And I'm thinking like, well, what kind of, roadblocks do you have in place? And a lot of times they don't, and they haven't been updated, and they haven't been revisited. And I'm hoping that as we move forward and people are looking at new ways to help navigate their corporation, that's one of the areas that they invest in, so that people, when they, like you said, when they come here, they feel like if they have an issue or they don't have an issue, or they trying to navigate the system, that information is there for them to be able to navigate.
Yeah, thank you, John. I love that question, because it's top of mind for so many people. So I too wish that a lot of companies would do a better job at onboarding, because there's nothing like starting a job and you feel alone, or you feel like you don't know where to go or who to talk to. And we've all had that feeling, right? And Kevin brought this up earlier, a lot of companies have employee resource groups. And often companies will have a Black employee resource group. So that is a great opportunity to, when you start a company, instantly ask, do you have a Black employee network? Join the Black employee network, because from there you're going to have a sense of community, and those people are going to know, John, what you're hitting at, which is the unwritten rules of the company, right? So every company has their documentation, they have the rules, but then there's the unwritten rules of how things get done and how you navigate. And there is no handbook for that, right? But you will find people in the company who have tenure, they will understand that. They will know that, right? Like the back of their hand. And so if you can connect in that way by joining a Black employee network, they're going to be able to guide you through those unwritten rules. Another thing that you can do if your company doesn't have a Black employee resource group is you can ask for a mentor, right? And you can decide what that mentor looks like. If it's someone that's been at the company for a long time, if it's someone with a disability because you have a disability and you're going to need to know that information, if it's someone that has children because you have children and you're going to be thinking about, how do I manage this job and manage my home life? But seek out those mentors. 9 times out of 10, if you ask someone to mentor you, they're going to say yes. And again, they're going to be able to navigate for you through those unwritten rules. So I would say, again, don't count on HR to do everything, right? We're going to give you the handbook. We're going to show you where the restrooms are. But there's some things that you're not going to be able to get from HR that you can get from a really good mentor or sponsor or an employee resource group.
I love your disclosure. HR's at everything. That's a good one. That's a good one.
Yes.
Go ahead, Danielle.
My question is, do you have any data collection on most discriminated groups, or, reasons or areas? Do you have, because John, you always mention Black and Brown together, always as one, and we all have our own separate issues. Yes, with minorities, but I know African Americans that are in a workplace where it appears to be diverse because there's a lot of other groups, but when it comes to African Americans, they are at the bottom. So they see more diversity with Latinos and Asians and other groups, but when it comes to African Americans, not so much. So I don't know if we're always going through the same thing all the time and clumped together, and sometimes that could be a problem because we're not really separating those personalized, individual, those other groups. So, I'm asking you though, if where have you seen work discrimination place? Which group of protected classes or non-protected classes does most of this discrimination cases fall under, and what are some of those reasons?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be different for every corporation, what you see. What I've seen most companies track is the type of cases that come in. So most companies have an ethics hotline or a team member advocate that you can call, or the legal department where you can file a complaint, right? And so what companies are going to be looking at is the classifications of that complaint. So certainly if they're getting a lot of discrimination cases, that's a red flag, and they are going to drill into that. So they're going to look at who's being impacted, right? So it could be looking at different protected classes, whether it's age or race. They're going to look at where are those cases happening, right? So are we getting a lot of cases from the same manager, or is it different managers? Is it in a certain location? So if you're in numerous places in the US, let's say you're in Texas and California, are all the cases coming in from Texas? Because if so, that tells us we have a problem. So I would say there's a lot of different ways that companies slice and dice data. And certainly if they start to see trends around certain behaviors, they are going to drill down and look at that. But I don't have one answer of what group is impacted the most, because it's going to vary greatly depending on the company, the population of that company, the culture of that company. It's going to be very different. But I think what is important is that the organization is looking for those trends. And most companies have, as part of their board of directors, they have an audit committee. And so, for example, what I have to do is not only manage the ER department and the discrimination cases, but I have to report out to the board on what do those trends look like? What are we seeing? And what are we doing to mitigate that, right? Because if we see there's a certain populations, if Blacks are adversely impacted, then what training are we putting in place, right? What managers are we holding accountable? Are we terminating the managers that are driving or promoting that behavior? And so that's what the board is there for, to make sure those checks and balances are in place. Now, that's a good company, right? We know not all companies are equal. So if you are in a situation where you're noticing that, all of your associates at work that are Black, you all are experiencing this issue, then I would say you need to report it. And to Kevin's point, you can also reach out to the EEOC if you feel like nothing is being done about it, not only to investigate it, but to correct it going forward. That's really the important piece, right?
Yeah, I think that's phenomenal how you broke that down. And I'm glad Danielle asked that, because I think part of this equity ask and this inclusion ask is we do have to kind of focus in on the Black and Latinx and Brown community, because again, that diversity loophole, a lot of times we get sucked in that. And even just not in HR, but in contracting, we're seeing it. I'm getting complaints from people just talking about we need to have a conversation on this, even in the contract area. When it comes to government contracting, business contracting, where what's happening is we use the diversity clause, and what's happening is the Black and Brown are still being affected. So if you say I need a minority-owned business, the other cultures have used the women of the family to start the business to get that protected clause, and then we're still not being impacted in a way that helps us. So I think I'm talking to some people, working with some people, and they want to put together something that says, hey, especially when it comes to state contracting or city contracting or different things, we need to have something in there that says a percentage of it goes to Black or African descent, Brown, Latinx, because this it just to kind of specific, have some specific on the minority or the diversity part. Because what happens is we just throw out this minority diversity, umbrella, and then again, it's these pockets that still are being affected by it. So I think that was a great point bringing that up.
Affirmative action still fails. So all this diversity talk, and it still fails. So people saying stuff, but what is it looking like? Because it passed before and it didn't pass now. We seem like we're way further along than we were 20 years ago. What happened? So 20 or 30 years ago, whenever the first one passed. So yeah, Definitely have to consider that, John. Thank you.
And I like what you said, John, because what I do know is what gets measured gets done, right? So sometimes when you look at diversity, equality, and inclusion reports of a company, if you lump together all underrepresented groups, to your point, that could be all women, right? So we want to get a bit more granular and take a step further to let's look at it by each diversity dimension, right? So let's look at the Black population. Let's look at Latinx. Let's look at people with disabilities. Let's look at veterans. Let's look at women, right? Because we may be doing well in aggregate, but when you break that down, you probably still have some opportunities. And I would assume the same is true on the contracting side, right? So let's look at it holistically, but then let's also look at what out of those underrepresented groups, where do we still have opportunity to do more?
Right, and this is the last time I'm bringing this up, but when affirmative action was set in place, it was said that white women were the main beneficiaries out of that. And that kind of speaks to your point. It included all these groups, but who benefited from it? And the studies show that it was white women. So yeah, we do need to take a closer lens and look at each group individually and see how it's affecting everyone. And specifically, again, going back to you, John, making sure we hold the companies, organizations accountable so that individual groups that are left down on the list are represented.
I love that you. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, John.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Danielle, thank you for bringing that up, because what I see in corporate America, a lot of times when people start diversity programs or they talk about diversity, it is synonymous with gender. And there's so much more in that diversity spectrum than gender. So gender is not a bad place to start. But if you really want to be mature in your DEI practices, you need to look far beyond gender at all of the other diversity dimensions. And when you look at that and you look at intersectionality, right? So not only are you, Danielle, a woman, but you're a Black woman, right? And someone may be a woman and a Black woman and a woman and also have a disability, right? Their experience and how they're treated is going to be very different than someone who maybe only has one of those dimensions. And so we have to start looking at this differently if we're really going to make progress. And I think that's one thing we all can do in our organizations is start having the conversation about how it's more than gender. I recently did an interview and someone was asking me about pay equity and they kept pounding on gender. And I'm like, yes, that's important. But not only in our study do we look at gender, we look at Blacks, we look at Latinx, we look at veterans, we look at people with disabilities, because we want to make sure everyone is being paid fairly. It's not just a gender pay equity study, it is a pay equity study. So I think your point, I just want to highlight it because I don't want anybody to miss that.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm glad you honed in on that, because I was trying to go there, but I wanted to wait a little bit as we got closer to the end, because it's an issue across America, especially with gentrification. I know Danielle keeps talking about this affirmative action. I'm glad Kevin said it. You know, people here in the West Coast, this left progressive thinking, have to understand with gentrification, it has changed dramatically. We're not so the progressive left as we think we are. Gentrification has played a role in it. And again, when we don't give these opportunities locally and we let this growth, especially in the tech industry, we've seen it. You start pulling all these different people from different countries, from different parts of the United States. It has really turned California into a different state, and it's going to be challenging moving forward. And these conversations are very important, because the fight is really going to start in the next couple of years, especially in the Black and brown community. And thank you for honing in on that, because this pay equity is an issue, especially here in the Bay Area, not only for women, but for our minority groups up under there. It is a job. And I think what you was talking about, culture, is a big part of it. This old thinking and these cultures that we've been brought up on, and not being able to be advanced, because I think sometimes we hold on to too much history and not enough future. And as we move closer to the future, we definitely going to have some real conversations. And I'm hoping that the administration that we have will really start digging in and looking into these corporations and the profits, and how to make sure that equity is coming down that ladder, to make sure that everybody is being impacted, especially when it comes to pay. But with that being said, I want to jump into one thing. I know we're getting close to the end here. mental health. So HR mental health is a big thing that I want to talk about because I believe, and I told you I'm a little radical, but I think in this country, mental health is just as bad as COVID. And I think moving forward, this mental health conversation within employment, just in our community around the United States, this conversation needs to happen. And I think it's going to take corporations as well to get behind the theory of in this 8-hour workday or 10-hour workday or whatever, how do we incorporate the mental health to give access to the employees? Because I think to make this change and really everybody's talking about mental health, but we know in the Black and brown community, you start talking about mental health, that's a stigma, a taboo. Nobody want to talk with it and deal with it. But I think we can leverage the employers to help this movement, right? Because I'm all about, I believe mental health is important. We see these workplace shootings. We see these different issues in the workplace that causes people to have these reactions. And how do we incorporate that? How do we get this mental health thing culturally cool, but also in a work environment, writing up these policies in a way that we really can have an impact? Because I think it's going to take a little bit of everyone, and corporations included, to help this mental health movement. And I think we need to do more investing in it because it is a problem. We see the mass shootings, we see the workplace shootings, we see all of this stuff that's happening, and it all stems from mental health, people being overworked, stress. Workplace bullying is a big thing on the rise in America.
Yes.
And we have to have these conversations. Nobody's talking about it. We get locked into these little groups, but workplace bullying and some of the stuff that's happening from upper management and different things of that nature are affecting people. So how do we incorporate that? Or from your lens, what does that look like from an HR standpoint when we're talking about this thing of mental health?
Yeah, so thank you for bringing it up, John, because it is a real issue, and we see it more and more, especially during COVID. So I think number one, we have to move away from it being taboo, right? So we need to start having open conversations like this. Companies need to have open conversations, right? And we need to acknowledge that it is a problem, and companies need to provide support. Right. So we want to make sure that our team members are able to do their best work. They can't do that if they have anxiety or they're stressed out or they're burnt out, right? Or they're dealing with issues of how to balance home and life. And so it's important that companies provide resources so that we can help our team members. You know, the last thing you want is for someone to hurt themselves or to hurt others or to just be in a state of fog or depression, right? Nobody wants that. And I think companies have a real role to play in providing those resources. So whether it's an employee assistant program where you have free counseling, whether it's bringing in specialists to have these conversations. I want to give a shout out to Kasla Crockett. We actually brought her into Micron to talk to some of our team members in the US and in Asia, right, about the impacts of mental health during COVID. And I think it's so important for employers to provide these resources and let people know, hey, it's okay to not be okay, right? There's a lot going on. So let's talk about it and let's give you the help that you need and the time off of work, right, to address whatever it is you have going on so that you can come back and be whole. And I think it goes to when you think about diversity and inclusion, again, you used to leave that person at home and you show up as this other person at work. But now we're saying, bring your whole self to work. If you have mental health issues, that's okay. We support you, we're with you, and we're here to help you work through it.
Wow. Yeah, that's phenomenal. I'm pushing for it. You know, I'm talking to our elected officials, and we have to really have this conversation because it's a leverage point that we can use in monetizing these corporations. We give so many tax breaks, especially here in the Bay Area, to these tech companies and different large organizations that come here, that we have to find a way to also monetize this mental health thing. And part of that incentive could be making sure that the employees are getting, we have so many things where there's safety meetings, different things happening. We have all these wasted corporate meetings. I could just sometimes, I sit in meetings and I go, 3 hours of this. How do we incorporate some of that funding to make sure that the staff and employees get this mental health? Because it's very important. And I'm just going to keep pushing this conversation. But I think definitely these corporations have to do a little bit more. And then, talking to our elected officials and making sure that as they thinking about what this tax break looks like, and especially in the tech, making sure that they're doing so much to impact the Black and brown community, making sure that mental health, because we're always trying to find unique ways to get this mental health thing. Everybody talks about it, but we have to really start looking at ways to really start incorporating it. And we know people are tied to their jobs with money, and maybe that's how we start incorporating it. And then we get into the communities, the schools, to the families, and then we can really start changing this dynamic on mental health, especially in the workplace. I think it's very important.
I love that, John. And I want to jump back to something you said earlier. You touched on immigration. And I just want to highlight, because it goes back to the zero sum game, right? I do think that there is plenty of opportunity for everyone. And one of the best things I think I did in my career was I was working for a very North America centric company. And I went to a global company that has a lot of people come in from other countries in our San Jose office and our Boise office. And you hear different languages when you walk down the hall. And I actually found that to be a more inclusive environment for me, right? So I wasn't different. Everybody's different now, right? Everybody is from somewhere else. And what I also like when we think about the Black community in particular, we have a lot of Black engineers at Micron that have come from Africa, right? That come in on visas and they're doing great work. And so I do think that there is opportunity for everyone. But I think it's important that everyone has that opportunity, right? Whether you're from a different country or you're a Black person in the US. The point is, if you have the qualifications, you should have an opportunity to get the job. So I just want to call that out and highlight that.
Yeah, definitely important. I'm all for everybody getting a fair opportunity. Again, but that fair opportunity looking like the native Blacks here in America get that opportunity as well. And I have to always advocate for them. I'm not shutting anybody out, but I know that our native Blacks a lot of time are getting passed upon, and there's a lot of talent in these communities. I've dealt with a number of community partners in different organizations. I've had people talk about this, and it is a real thing that a lot of times, corporations will give opportunities for people that don't might have all of the qualifications. But when it comes to the native Black and our Latin communities, we don't get those same opportunities. And I think that's the equity talk about giving. Maybe you don't have everything on that job description, but it tends to be when it comes to our whites and others, they'll give them that opportunity and the company will invest into that training and they'll have that energy to them. But when it comes to our native Blacks in the community, the opportunity and the investment is not always there. And I just want to make sure that I also put that out there because we have to do better.
And that's a talent and management team issue to me, because they're doing the hiring. Management is doing the hiring. So, I know a woman that had worked for, I'm not going to say it's a large company here in the Bay Area. They're all around the world, but the .com of that company is here in the Bay Area. And her team was predominantly Southeast Asian. And she said when that manager came into position, he hired nothing but Southeast Asians. And she was the only African-American that are there. Sure. So now the company has diversity. You have more Southeast Asians, but we don't have the African-Americans. And like I said earlier, some African-Americans feel because of that, when they get in positions where they are in management, they're kind of scared to hire their own because people are thinking, wow, this is going to change. I know someone personally that says, hey, so-and-so, they're only hiring all the Black people, and a friend of mine said, hey, well, when Lisa was here, a lot of white people came in the door. And when so-and-so was here, a lot of Asian people came in the door. Why are you all of a sudden have an issue now that I'm in management and a lot of African-Americans come in? So sometimes we're scared to hire our own because of those reasons. But it happens all the time.
Yeah. And I think I'm sorry. Go ahead, John. I keep jumping. Go ahead. Go ahead. Okay. No. Well, what I was going to say is, we know again that diverse managers hire diverse talent. That's why it's so important that we have representation, not just at the lower levels, but at the higher levels, right? SVP, C-suite, VP, that is very important. But when you have, for example, 3 to 4% representation of Blacks in a company, even if they just hired Blacks, you still wouldn't meet your numbers, right, of what's available in the talent addressable market. So what I would say needs to happen is we need other managers of other ethnicities to be open and be looking for talent everywhere, right? So not hiring but let's look at the pool of candidates and make sure we have representation and that we're giving everyone an equal shot. Until that happens, we're never going to get there, right? And again, I want to highlight, it can't just be at the lower levels. It has to be at the executive level that we're bringing in that diverse talent, because those leaders and that representation, not only are they going to hire more diverse leaders, but it's going to attract more diverse talent, because now I see someone that looks like me at the top and I know I can get there.
Wow, that's very deep. Yeah, and I mean, while we're talking about this talent pool and all of this, I also want to, ask you about, because you talked about a little bit how changes are in this country, because I'm not for sure from your perspective, but there's a lot of jobs that's not fulfilled. You look on the ED side, or you look at some of the job posting sites, a lot of recruitment. There's a lot of corporation who has, thousands and thousands of jobs that haven't been filled. And I want to ask you from your perspective, is there time for a shift in the workplace in America that we start looking at more apprentice type work, meaning that maybe a person has a bachelor degree, but the position requires a master degree, that we start investing in paid training or helping these people go get this to fill these jobs? Because that's one of the frustrating things that I always see. It's like all these job openings and it's all these people out of work. And it's like, when do in America we shift this change of like, how do we get these people to fill these jobs? And maybe it is, okay, this person has a bachelor's degree, but we want a person with a master's degree. We invest in that. And maybe the pay is a little bit less, but we get them in the position and we get them there so that we can fulfill it. Just wanted to get your perspective on it, because I think the way we looking at employment and job opportunities in this country, it has to change. We always look from this one perspective, and I think it's time to make some kind of shift, and maybe the apprenticeship model. And I know a lot of unions do that, but paying people to go to school to fill these jobs and learn on the job, even if they have some of the qualification, is that the right model, or is it just too much of a risk? I don't know, and that's why I'm asking you from an HR standpoint.
Yeah, John, I think it is the right model. I think you're totally onto something there. So what we're seeing companies start to do is start looking less at formal education and start thinking about learning agility, right? So not necessarily do you have this degree, but do you have the ability to learn and to learn quickly? Because we know technology is changing all the time. So even if you go to school, the skills that you learn may not mean anything 4, 5, 6 years from now, right? We're just moving that, the pace of technology is moving that quickly. And so what you're starting to see some technology companies do is offer those apprenticeship programs, right? So go through our program, learn how to code, and then guess what? You automatically get an interview with us for a position. And so you'll start to see, I think, more and more of that. The other thing that we're starting to see happen is a lot of education and content is free now, right? So things you used to have to go to college for, you can go on YouTube, right? And watch a video and get that same information. You can take a course, online. You don't have to be at the university. So I think over time, those requirements will change. And I think the companies that are going to win the war on talent are those that recognize that and capitalize on that now. And if you look around, you're starting to see companies doing that, which is, I think, really exciting, because again, it opens up a whole new talent pool and it levels the playing field. Maybe you couldn't afford to go to college, but you have the time to invest in this class that's for free, that's given by a potential employer.
Wow, phenomenal. I think that.
And what I want to say real quick, that's how people got into tech. My brother is in the tech industry. He's one of those 6-figure plus people. He didn't go to a top college. He doesn't have the bachelor's degree, and all people in tech started like that. All people in tech started like that. You didn't have, it was not required that you have a bachelor's or a master's degree to be in these fields. Now maybe things have changed a little bit, but hey, he's just as talented, but because he's got the skills and been in the training, he can go to any company, and he's been to a lot of major, worked at a lot of major tech companies. So we need to look at what you said, Job, skills training, skills-based training. Because someone said to me before, college doesn't speak to your skill set. It just says that you're educated, right? Or that you can be educated. Let me say that. But it doesn't speak to your actual skill set. That's something that you learn once you're on the job.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, and I think definitely there is an opportunity, and I'm calling out the administration that we have in place now, especially with the bill going up about infrastructure. Bringing back some of these programs like Job Corps, different vocational training. Because I think the real conversation that we need to start having in America is this college thing, because this debt is really hurting us and it's hurting the workforce. We have people being, putting hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt and getting in jobs that they can't even make the money to pay back the debt, or getting jobs that's not even sustainable. And I think we have to shift this model. And maybe it's, we give the education and we look at other ways to leverage the payback so that we could get the people in the right talent. Because the way, going through school now and racking up all of the debt and not even having an opportunity, I think if we try to reverse it and maybe get the opportunity and then we leverage the income to pay back for the skills learned is a new approach that we may have to change. And I mean, I know a lot of times our legislative people are losing touch and tone with the community, but I hear people, and I'm talking to people who have all this debt. It's like, man, we need to really talk about changing that. And I know there's a lot of money going into this infrastructure, and that's supposed to bring jobs, but people are going into debt to try to get these jobs. How do we reverse it? And I think this vocational training, and even in the administrative world, just rethinking this. And getting people to training and then leveraging the income that way, because I know some countries trying it where they educating the people, giving them a job, and they taking 10% or 15% of their income to pay back for the training. We just have to look at another way to get people engaged, because people get overwhelmed when it comes to that training and meeting the qualifications. And I just think that's just another conversation that we have to have, and leveraging our lawmakers and our corporations to get behind the movement so that we can get people to work. And I know we're 10 minutes away from wrapping this up. The last thing that I want to jump into, if we can hone into this, because we're talking about this workplace discrimination and equity, and all this is all ties together, the application process. So when you talked about that, it made me think so many people at the application process get removed, whether it's criminal background, whether it's race, discrimination. How close are we in making that change where some of these requirements are removed so people get a fair opportunity? Because again, I talk to people, and some of these questions that's on applications are turning them away. And I'm working with an organization. I'm trying to help them, time done, talking about how do we look at people reentry coming in the community. Because the second chance in America has kind of went away. People make a criminal mistake and it's just they can't get an opportunity. And I think it further pushes some of the issues that we are seeing in our communities with homelessness and not being able to get an opportunity. Where are we at in that shift? Because I think the application process is a lot of it that eliminates people from getting in the door. And how do we fix that? Where people don't have to identify I'm Black. I mean, we've seen it in housing. The discrimination is happening in the application process before the interview, before even getting in the door, and people are turning away. And we want people to feel included. We want them to be able to get to the table and have that opportunity. Where are we at in that?
And let's not mention those names on the application. Sometimes they see a certain name and they already like,
you mean like Laquita, Lakeisha, Laquanda?
Yes. You add Jackson on the back of it. Come on now.
Yeah, I do think, and I mentioned earlier, there are companies who are anonymizing resumes. So we do that at our company. We strip the names off, we strip the gender off. So I think some companies that are progressive and understand there's an opportunity for more equality in their hiring processes are already there. That's the good news. Now, there's a lot of companies that aren't there, right? But I think what's going to be the motivator for them is the lack of talent that we have in the market. So I do think that will change. I think companies are at a very different place. And I'm so glad, John, you brought up this question because I believe everybody deserves a second chance, right? And I don't know, companies look at this very differently. So there are some organizations out there that are partnering with Fortune 500 companies to say, hey, let's start giving folks who have a criminal background a second chance, right? And let's not judge them on their past. We all have past experiences. So there are some companies who have very targeted programs to bring in those folks into their corporations. I wish it was more than what we're seeing now. I still think there's a long way to go with that. And I think one of the ways that you can tackle that is getting in the ears of the leaders. I know you guys are tired of me talking about leaders, but if you have one leader,
here's one of our leaders right here, Shamar Walton. He's the first Black male president of the Board of Supervisors of San Francisco. He
Awesome.
tuned in, and he is doing that right now, fighting. And it starts with people like that, and you're right. So he's definitely fighting for this, and just happy to see him tuning in and seeing what we're talking about today. Very, very important. It starts with people like him and leaders like you. So I just wanted to throw that in there. I didn't want to cut you off, but just wanted to throw that in there.
No, shout out to Shaman for doing the good work, because it does take leaders to say, hey, I have an idea. This is something I feel passionately about. We talked about performative DEI, right? We say we're committed to social justice. Let's walk the talk now, right? Let's implement this program. Let's give folks a second chance. So I do think it takes leaders to raise those issues and start to vet those programs and make a change. And again, I wish more companies were there. I think that's at a much slower walk than the anonymizing of resumes and not judging based on names. But the other thing too, you all, and again, I want to go back to this because I feel like we have power too. I don't want to work for a company that doesn't want to hire me because my name is Sharon. If you have a problem with my name is Sharon, that probably isn't the environment for me. And so please do dismiss me, right? Because there's some other companies that may be very happy to have a Sharon, and that will be better for them and better for me. So I almost feel like it's their loss in a way, right? We are very talented. We're very creative people, right? And if you're stuck on my name and the biases you have associated with that, I probably don't want to be at your organization.
Wow, phenomenal. Well put. I'm glad you said that. That's what we're trying to do here at both sides of the conversation. Support our Black and brown business. Be intentional with educating our community, giving them the information so that we can impact others. And I always tell people it's important to support Black businesses. If we help them evolve and grow, there's more opportunities for us being hired by people that look like us and understand our culture, because we know there's not enough culture appropriate people in these workplaces to help us and understand what we go through in our struggles day to day. So just man, powerful stuff. Thanking you for coming on today, giving you this time as we start wrapping this up. I just want to give you an opportunity, Danielle, an opportunity before we close out every show to give your last words to community, whatever that is, from an HR standpoint. How do we help them? Anything that you could give gems as people starting to look for jobs, getting back into the market as we come out this COVID. I just want to give you that opportunity to give your last words before we close out today's conversation.
Yeah. So one thing we didn't talk about, I fundamentally believe this: your network is your network. So a lot of times you can apply for a job online, but if you know someone in the company that can be an advocate for you, I would say reach out. We have LinkedIn now. There's so many tools. You can go on LinkedIn and hit up someone you don't even know. You could hit me up and say, hey, I'm interested in Micron. Here's my resume. Is there anything for me? Or I saw this position. What do you think? So I think we need to really use our network in a different way. I know that, and we know for a fact that the Black community is not as connected as other communities, but that's something we all need to do better at. So let's connect. Those of you that are on this call, let's keep supporting each other. Let's keep having these conversations so that we really can drive more representation, more opportunities. That would be my one thing to leave on.
Wow, thank you. And I definitely go connect a little bit more with you. I know Kosh have a connect with you because that's what we're trying to do here. And, we need our allies and we need our people that look like us to come on this platform and drop these jewels and this information to us. So many times people climb the corporate ladder, climb the educational ladder, and they forget to come back down and reach a hand and pull somebody up. And that's why our Educational Thursday is so important. It's individuals like you that have these different professional backgrounds to come on, put on a PowerPoint presentation and give information to the community that we might not necessarily have access to. And this network part, again, you coming on here, people can reach out, you're sharing information. And again, sometimes it's just, hey, check out my resume. Is this good? Things of that nature. So to all our allies out there who say they do support us, we need you as well to come on our platform, reach out, give an education presentation, help the community. Because as we come out of this COVID, yes, there's a lot of money and programs that's going to help people, but we want to make sure that people just don't get jobs. They're able to sustain, be there for the long haul. Let's give them the right tools, the right preparation, so that when they go into these jobs, they can keep them at a long lasting point. So just want to say thank you again. Danielle, you got any last words you want to give out to the community before we close the show out?
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you to Kevin in his absence. One thing I learned today is we need to stop just chasing the money. I mean, I've looked at, when I look for jobs and stuff, like the first thing I look at, how much they're paying. It really might not be worth it in the end. If I get there and I'm having mental health issues, it just might not be worth it. So I learned to go ahead and do my research today and do my homework, just like you would research your schools and all your other industries like that, and in your hospitals, and you research your doctors. But we don't really look into our jobs and our hiring practice and diversity and things like that. So I learned today that that is just as important. So I'm definitely going to do that. Aside from scrolling from the pay, I'm going to probably do that first. But after I scroll and look at how much they're paying, I will be looking into the diversity team, or if they have one in practices and so forth.
That's
so
right.
Thank you for that.
Love that, Danielle. I love that. We remember, you're the prize, right? A job is great, but you're bringing a whole lot. So make sure it's somewhere you're going to be loved, you're going to be seen, heard, valued, respected.
Definitely. And we are coming to a point where the baby boomers are retiring off. And as Sharon kept saying, there's talent missing. We need to get some of our young people involved. It is time to pass the torch, and let's equip our young people with the tools that they need so they can fill and get some of these positions, because we know the other races are doing their job to help get their kids ready and getting their community ready to get these positions. And we got to do the same in our community to equip our young people with the tools.
Sorry to cut you off. I want to say one more thing. We do need Blacks in management, people. Yes. Okay. We need more Black people. And I heard one man say, tell me that he gets paid more than the manager, so it's not worth getting there. But no, okay, it is important, okay, because it's going to move you up higher probably in the ladder and expose you to more opportunities and things like that. So please, we need to look into management positions, definitely.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you and Kevin for coming on today. Phenomenal conversation. We are getting ready to close this show out. We're getting ready for our next segment. We have our Hidden Gem segment coming up this Tuesday, where we continue to highlight Black and brown businesses and highlight those community leaders that are doing things, like people like Sharon that are impacting our community. We give them their flowers and their roses and let them know that we appreciate you, the things that you're doing. That's what that segment is about. So looking forward to another Hidden Gem segment. And then this Thursday, we're going to have another educational Thursday. We're going to have a phenomenal conversation about cryptocurrency. You guys heard us talking about the economic power. It's an opportunity for you to learn how to get into the cryptocurrency and how to do stocks and invest. We have a phenomenal speaker coming on to educate community about investing. And then next Sunday, we'll have a phenomenal conversation. I know people are looking on the website, what's the topic? We're going to keep that out. We're going to put it to you. We have a phenomenal sister that's going to come on, a great influencer doing a lot of amazing things. She'll be talking about Clubhouse and some of the things that's going on so that our people get an opportunity to monetize on the social media and these platforms to really have an impact in our community. So we're looking forward to that conversation next Sunday. With that being said, thank everybody for tuning in. Phenomenal conversation. I hope you all got something out of these two powerful individuals that came in here and educate us. This video will be back up on our YouTube as well as on our website. So if you missed some part of it today, you could go back and take a look at it. This information is very powerful, and we're going to keep these conversations going here at both sides of the conversation as we keep moving in the future. We're going to get different individuals to have different parts of this conversation because it's real and it's needed, and it's always needed to have it from people that look like us. So once again, thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you this Tuesday. Have a great evening and a blessed day.
Thank you.